get us started. All right, thank you everybody for joining us. For those that are new to 4M, 4M is an initiative of the Tech Hub Coalition, powered by We Pivot, myself, and the Commons, Joe, who is not here today, you see, because he's a little busy getting a little recognition called the 40 Under 40 from Milwaukee. So we'll have to do without Joe today, but if you get a chance, give him a little shout out, congratulate him. It's an amazing achievement, so we're all super proud of him. So for that reason, we'll excuse him for today's workshop. But we do have with us the awesome Nick Artman from RokkinCat, who has an amazing workshop put together for everybody on product management. So I'm just not going to hold it up anymore. I'm just going to kick it right over to Nick and let him get things going.
Cool. Thank you, Maggie. So like Maggie said, my name's Nick. I'm one of the founders of RokkinCat, which is a software contracting shop that focuses on specifically custom software custom product development. So when we started the company, we focused almost exclusively on building products for extremely early stage startups. And over the years, we've expanded that to include much later stage startups as well as larger enterprise. We've worked with companies that are invested in by Y Combinator, and we've had some of our clients go on to raise like Series A rounds. I think the total amount of investment we've seen from our clients is at 14 million now. So we've gotten to see product development across a very wide range of the development spectrum. And so today I want to talk to you about how we at RokkinCat think about product management, and then after that, building and managing a software team. So like I said, we've seen product management across a very wide range of the maturity spectrum, but today I want to talk specifically about pretty early stage software startups, not something that's been in production for 5-6 years. So to start out, I want to walk through the kind of roadmap or storyline that most people think of when they think of tech startups. So the founder comes up with this brilliant idea, and they pitch it to some investors. The investors just love the idea so much, they cut you a check to go and build your product, and then boom, straight to the moon. Well, actually, this doesn't quite look right. In my experience, when something like this happens, it's usually not investors that the founder is pitching. It's more often a family member. And the family member, I guess they don't necessarily love the idea so much as they love the founder. And it helps if the family member is rich. So I guess we'll add another step, have a rich family member. And even better if they can also have rich friends. That'd be the best version. And then boom, there we go, straight to the moon. So it's okay if you don't self-identify with that story. It's not the version that works for everybody. It absolutely is a viable way to start your business. So if you've got all those things, by all means, go ahead. But for most people, that's very much a fairy tale. So let's try again. Let's start over. Okay, so tech startup roadmap. And so like we said, this version doesn't quite work as written, but let's assume you're going to still be pitching investors. Well, an investor normally won't just cut a check for an idea, no matter how awesome they think the idea is. More often, they're going to be investing in a product or a team, but more often a product that's mostly working at this point. But in order to have a product, I guess you'll have to have built it before you get investment. So you're going to be doing it for free. But most of you are tech startups, so that would mean that you need to know how to code first. And so again, I'm not going to ask anybody to learn how to code here. This is a version of a roadmap that absolutely works for some people, but ultimately it's not accessible to most founders. But what these two fairy tale scenarios have in common is that they have infinite runway. They can just keep trying things over and over and over again until something works, because they don't really have anything that's going to stop them from trying. But having infinite runway is just one of the many ways to get to what I think is the most important core essential aspect of a startup, which is product market fit. And I'm sure that Maggie and Joe have talked to you a lot about product market fit. And definitely learning how to code is one way to get there. But I think that there's a different and much more attainable skill, or quickly attainable skill, that's way, way more valuable for a founder to have when looking for product market fit, which is understanding how to get there for cheap, like way, way cheap. And the buzzword industry term for this is Flintstone. Maggie, have you talked about Flintstoning at all during? Okay, cool.
No.
So Flintstoning is when you build a tech business with the most rudimentary prehistoric tools that you can think of. So think spreadsheets, Excel, Google Forms, Squarespace websites, manually typing information into a computer, calling people on the phone, as weird as that is in 2021. So if having infinite runway is the magic fairy tale unicorn version of the startup world, then Flintstoning is the workhorse of the startup world. And I think this is a super important concept for tech startups to understand, because it teaches you how to put to work and exploit the ways that software products are pretty counterintuitive. And what do I mean by counterintuitive? So most people, when they think of building a product, they understand it similar to how you would build a product that, like, you go to the store and buy something that's a physical good. And the big constraint that those types of products have is if you make a crappy version of that, like a crappy backpack or a crappy device, then that device is just crappy forever. And actually, I have one of the original Google Glass, the first version, if you want to hear how crappy that is. So the only way to improve on a physical product like this is to just start over from scratch, develop a new one, and hope that you can convince your customers to buy the second one and just promise them it's definitely good this time. But with an app or a website or any other software product, you can release an update, usually in just a minute or two, to fix problems that it has. And as soon as the update is out, then the bad version of the product it doesn't exist anymore. It's gone forever. And your customers are now using a good, new, improved version of that product. And that's why Flintstoning works especially well for software. It exploits the fact that software is cheap to change, and so you can skip a bunch of like product research and like all the development that physical good product developers have to do, and you can just ship anything that's just a tiny, tiny bit better than what people are doing today. So to illustrate this even further, I want to tell you about my absolute dream co-founder. If I was starting a startup today, who I would most want to start that startup with. And I don't know their name, but on Instagram they go by Low Cost Cosplay. So if you don't know what cosplay is, it's a hobby where people create costumes of their favorite characters from movies and TV shows and video games and stuff like that. And this person has made just an art of recreating iconic images and characters from stuff that he finds in his house. So this is his version of the cover of Titanic. So pretty convincing, not 100%, but pretty convincing. This is his take on Genie from Aladdin. And perhaps the cheapest one that I've seen him do is Darth Vader. So why would I want to start a company with this person? I don't even know who they are. But it's because launching a janky version of your product lets you start working on the business part of your product from day one with real customers. And one thing that people don't really start to feel until they have one is that software products themselves aren't businesses. They are just the mechanism that a business uses to deliver their value. And so if you pick tools that you already know how to use and come up with a clever way to deliver on your value proposition with those tools, then you can get started today. You could launch, this afternoon. So find one customer that will pay you for this version of your product, and then you'll have a real customer that you can ask for feedback. And that's where like all the startup books tend to start, is like you have one customer and then you can start doing that iterative loop to improve your product. But you have to get to one customer first. And I think founders tend to overestimate how much you need in order to get that first customer. So that customer can tell you ways that they want the product to improve, or tell you about new problems that they need solved. And you can just keep adding on new weird tools and workflows and ideas and concepts until at some point you're just can't serve any more customers. There won't be any more time in the day. And using the tools that you have available to you, you'll just be stuck. But I want to have a quick aside here about can't in this sentence. So lots of people think that they're stuck and that they can't keep adding more customers, and they try moving on to the next step, in my opinion, way too early. And so my guidance here is that knowing when to move on in this stage is a lot like knowing whether or not you've broken a bone. So if you hurt your wrist pretty bad, it's pretty common to think, oh no, I think I maybe broke my wrist. But if you broke your wrist, you definitely know that you broke your wrist. So lots of founders will think that they're stuck and try to move on to this stage way too early because they feel like they've exhausted their capacity to serve their customers. But a good rule of thumb is if you feel like you're dropping the ball for your customers, where you're starting to see a degradation in the quality of your value proposition simply because you're too busy. But at that point, you've accidentally Flintstoned your way into having an extremely real business. It has customers, it has an understanding of their problems and solutions to those problems, and you probably have revenue at this point, and you might even be profitable. And that puts you in a great position to do all sorts of things. You could hire on somebody and train them how to do what you've been doing and just increase your capacity. Or you can go out and start raising a round. Investors love to write checks to founders that are already making money. And they even more love to write checks to founders that know exactly what they need to be able to start making more money faster, and that can explain it in a nice, clear, and concise way. And so not only are you in a good spot to go raise money, but you'll also have discovered the smallest little bit of software, custom software, that can serve the needs of your customers effectively, because you've kind of built it from scratch by hand. And at this point, the version you're about to build to replace that janky mix of tools that you've been using up until this point is where most founders think their MVP sits. Like that's the software chunk and that's what the MVP is. But my challenge is to try to convince you that this version is more akin to the MVP that you're after, and that first version of software is more like your 1.0, your first release. I see so many founders get stuck trying to build their MVP because they can't imagine a version of their product that's more minimum than their first version idea of their minimum viable product. So to practice this, earlier we had people write down their the problem that they're trying to solve and their value proposition and their MVP. And so I'm hoping that we have a couple of brave souls who have some ideas on how they might be able to Flintstone their product rather than the MVP that they wrote down. So if we have anybody brave, feel free to unmute and speak up now.
Well,
Can I go?
I might have one.
Oops. Go for it. We have two people, so whoever.
Okay. Can I go first? This
Sure.
is Jeet. So we are working on a product which is an edutainment app. And the problem that we are trying to solve is that if we want to really bring diversity and inclusion, let's start from the childhood. It's very difficult to change the value of people when we grow as adults. So it's better to bring the kids to appreciate and embrace diversity and inclusion right from childhood.
I love that.
And our value prop is that we want to give the pre-packaged content to the school teachers so that they are spending less time on finding what's right or wrong, whereas they are so at least in the initial MVP stage, they are building the content with us, but later on to all the schools we can give the pre-packaged content. And our MVP is about the self-learning experience that we want to give so that kids can learn with the teachers in the class, but later on they can practice or learn about other countries as well. Anything else, Nick, you want me to answer on this?
So yeah, that's excellent. So do you have any ideas from that self-service version that you described in your MVP? Are there any ways that you can think of that you could scale that back to something that doesn't require any custom build or anything like that?
Yeah, there are. So we are exploring the technology tools, and looks like we are zeroing down on the Unity platform because we
Oh,
want to
interesting.
bring in, yeah, we want to bring in 3D animation. So Maggie is helping us to talk to some of the students we can work with. So there's a lot that we are trying to do. Yes, we want to create three things in our MVP. One is definitely the 3D animated videos so that the kids don't have to read all the time. The reading version will be there, but it's more interactive. And second thing we want to do is that we want to give the activities and the puzzles or the self building tools so that the kids could interact with that experience. So
Cool.
those are the two important things that we want to bring in the MVP, and we know that we have technical challenges to solve that. We really don't know that how are we going to solve for whether we should do audio plus video version or audio plus script version. So all those are still unknowns that we want to resolve for.
Excellent. Excellent. I love the idea of using Unity for the 3D animated videos.
Yep.
So before we move on from this one, does anybody else on the call have ideas for how maybe like any tools that you think might be useful to her to be able to Flintstone it even further?
You said you're using Unity, right?
Yep.
Yeah, she said she's using Unity. Yeah.
Yeah. Game design background here. Thinking about it, do you already have animators set up to create these 3D videos?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We are still exploring, and this is where we came to the point that we should use Unity. We
Yeah.
have to create the animators, animations, side views, front views, everything needs to be done yet.
Okay. I would say develop a workflow. It's kind of work out what you need to get done and create a roadmap from there. And that's just how we deal with clients.
So you're saying that we should do the workflow, right? That how this is all going to work, right? Script by script, or what's the
Just
Mhm.
you have your basic MVP requirements, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say sit down with someone who knows the Unity platform in depth and just create a roadmap about what basic pieces of a prototype you want done.
Okay.
Figure out what animations you want to add, what 3D models you want to add, and find someone who has knowledge experience to actually include to create a build in Unity to develop this product, develop the prototype. The very basic minimum code, you barely even need any to get an animation working. You can use all the built-in tools that are in Unity to create animations, to set up scenes. You may just need minimum amount of code to actually incorporate some of the. Is this like a game?
It will be more of animated videos where they could do some learning through the stories of
Okay.
bringing in diversity and inclusion, and then it will be the puzzles and activities. So that could be like a game, but
Okay.
it will be very minimal gaming, I would say, but still more of the animated videos and activities.
You don't.
I have a question. So when you say like 3D video, are you speaking more to like a VR type of experience, or like is this just like a video that they can watch on like a computer screen or?
Yeah, so this is very good because yesterday only we had a discussion around VR, and so in phase 2 or phase 3 we'll go towards VR, but right now we want to stick to the video, and maybe at a later stage we will take it to the VR so that the kids could interact by one person using the kit of VR, but others still interacting through their devices, but not right now.
The
I would
reason
say,
why the
Yeah.
reason why I asked is, at least from a Flintstoning perspective, one thing that came to mind was I think it's called like VR chat. So like I have like an Oculus headset, and you can basically go into this online into this place where like other people are and talk and interact with them in in a limited way, maybe not 100% in a way that you would like, but the other part of it is you can record whatever you're doing in a headset. So if you guys were to get your hands on an Oculus, you could literally go in VR chat, play out these scenarios, record the video, and then that would be like sort of like your content. So,
and would that be an Oculus Quest or Oculus Rift?
the Quest is the one I have. I think
Yeah.
the game supports multiple headsets. You just need one that can like download the app
Yeah,
and
I'm
that
just
can
thinking
like do screen
because
recording.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking that the Rift does require a PC hookup, while the Rift is
Right,
wireless. So, well, the Quest is wireless.
right.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking that.
so Josh, I think that's a great idea. It's a great example of, and like certainly those videos are likely to be less engaging than a custom animated. Like no disagreement there. But getting a video out, and even if you need to buy an Oculus to do that, that's probably cheaper than an animator's time. So Josh, I think that's a great example of rethinking it with an off-the-shelf tool.
Yeah, Josh,
Animations are pretty cheap.
Josh, I'll reach out to you and even Matt to you as well, and we'll brainstorm a little further on this. Thank you
I
for
know.
bringing these ideas up. Yep.
I was just gonna say, I've done animation. I've hired people to do animations before, and sometimes it only costs maybe a couple hundred just to hire someone.
Oh, nice.
So
Cool. I didn't know that it was that inexpensive.
it depends on what kind of products you want and the quality of the animations. You also have character models that need to be made. It's a lot of details, but if you work out a budget and you run off like local talent, you can do it.
And I think one
Sorry.
thing, and I'm sure Nick's going to get to
Nope.
this too, one thing that you always have to keep in mind when you're thinking MVP is what are you testing, right? What is it that you want your MVP to prove out? So is it that you want them to prove that the videos are engaging, or is it the stories are great, or is it the characters? So whatever it is that you're trying to prove with that first version of your product, that you're truly trying to see, will my customer engage with, is what your MVP should be testing out. So to Nick's point, if you can Flintstone, if it's just the characters, it could be the paper characters, right? Like you can Flintstone that and just give like these really cute looking characters and to see like, oh, the kids are drawn to this. Or if it's just a story, then again, it could be the written story, it could be, audio, just to see, are the kids engaging, are they listening to it? So just also make sure you're always thinking like, what is it exactly, the data that I'm trying to collect, that I'm trying to prove that this is delivering.
Nick, do you mind if I ask a quick question?
Sure.
When it comes to Flintstoning, I've got an augmented reality app that augmented reality thing I'm working on. Originally, this was to improve rider safety for motorcycles and mopeds, but I've been actually scaling back the idea, and I'm actually going to be focusing on like an augmented reality app instead. And I'm thinking if I could build this into a phone, like I've got a Samsung S20 that I'm using right now. Think that would be a good way of actually Flintstoning this work?
So with some like really technical products, so like an augmented reality app, it can be pretty difficult to Flintstone with, and depending on what you're trying to get out of it. But quite possibly, so there's maybe a good example here. In one of my favorite versions of like a Flintstone app that didn't have to grow anywhere past what it already was, is there's a company that will that is a mobile app for blind people, and it just turns on the camera, and then they have headphones in their ears, and people will sign up to hop into a call basically with a blind person and explain what that blind person is pointing their phone at. And so they
Okay.
were able to do that with just like video calls, and they just wrapped a video call app in a custom frame. So I probably would have to know a fair bit more about what specifically you're trying to deliver, but augmented reality is often pretty difficult. But if you can come up with a different way to deliver the value proposition without augmented reality, is probably where I would do some exploration.
Okay, that's one way of doing it different. That's another approach to do. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Does anybody else want to see, or Nick, or do you want to move on to the next piece?
So we can move on to the next chunk here, and then if we want to keep doing these, so I talk with founders all the time and come up with ideas to Flintstone. And so at the end, we should have lots of time that we can dedicate to coming up with ideas.
Love it.
So for the next part of the talk, I'm going to talk about how to select a team and how to work with them. So I'm going to assume that you've managed at this point to build a bolted together cheap crap version of your product that is a loose approximation of what you're actually trying to build, but is serving your customer need. So at that point, it's time to either build or contract out a team to replace that with like the actual product that you're trying to build. So to do that, it's pretty helpful to understand a couple of things about programmers and the programming industry in general that often founders don't either understand or know or think about. So first off, and this isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule, but with any skill, the more time that someone dedicates to learning that skill and becoming an expert, the less time they're able to dedicate learning other things. So one of the big mistakes that I see founders do is they try to find the like most prestigious, best programmer that they can find, when in reality, most of the code that a business needs to write is pretty easy to write. It doesn't always mean that it's fast to write or cheap to write, but it usually doesn't require an expert. And so because of that is true, then it means that you probably don't want the best possible programmer, but instead you want a programmer who best understands the problem that you're trying to solve, and who can understand the full breadth of your business. And that is because when somebody is programming a product, they are making so many decisions on your behalf as they're turning it into software. So programming is kind of like explaining your product to the computer, but computers need things explained in an excruciating level of detail. It's like trying to teach a 4-year-old how to run your company. And so when I think about building software products, I think about it kind of like translating a poem. So in a poem, there's a lot of nuance and meaning and things that need to be interpreted if you're going to translate it into a different language and actually get the meaning across. So the translator needs to understand so much about that poetry to be able to convey that same meaning. And it's a lot easier to translate like the user manual for your fridge into a different language. That doesn't require much understanding. You can just take the words that you see on the page and turn them into a different language. And it's possible to sit down and write out what you need for a programmer to read in the form of like a user manual for a fridge, but it's extremely time consuming and it's probably not a skill that a founder has. And so it's much more efficient and effective to find somebody who can understand the poetry of your business model and turn that into a product than it is to try to write it out in great detail. And this is important because while many of the decisions that a programmer is going to be making on your behalf and on behalf of your business. Most of them aren't very important decisions. It's stuff like, what do we say to the user when they've typed in their email address wrong on the login form? So they make a lot of decisions like that. But there are also some decisions that are extremely important to your business. And if the technical partner that you have doesn't understand the business well enough, they're probably not even going to know that they've stumbled across one of those important decisions. And then they'll just make it for you and keep going to try to hit whatever deadline they've set. So being able to tell the difference is extremely hard unless the programmer knows the business pretty well. So the last thing is more about the programming community in general. So the software community has a long tradition of creating what's called open source software, which is usually free to use software. So Unity is a good example of this. It's an open source software, but Unity is unique in that it's a whole product that you can download and use. But most open source software is just like a little chunk of software that isn't useful by itself. It needs to be hooked into something else. And so if you think back to Flintstoning, where we're trying to come up with clever ways to use all these different little tools and components, the open source community is a massive new set of tools that become available to you, but you kind of need a guide to help you navigate it. It's hard without a programmer to be able to tap into that community and utilize it correctly. And there are a ton of products that come out every year that are just a few open source components glued together in a clever way and then released, usually by some programmer. But so you need to find somebody who can go read through and discover open source components that are relevant to your business that can save you a bunch of time. And it's hard to do that without understanding why you're asking for a particular feature or for a feature to work in a particular way. So again, you're generally trying to find a programmer that can understand your business or takes the time to understand your business. So the best case scenario for that, and Maggie will tell you this and most investors will tell you this, you want to try to find a technical co-founder. That's the best case scenario. So somebody who has some equity, they're bought into the company, they are enthusiastic about it succeeding. And this has the benefit of if you find a good experienced technical co-founder, then the rest of the product management you don't have to think too much about. You just need to make sure that they are involved in the business enough to be able to build a good product. The trouble is it's extremely difficult to find a technical co-founder, as many people will find out. So I have a couple tips for trying to find a technical co-founder. They're not always going to get you there, but I have a little bit of guidance there. So my favorite place to look for technical co-founders is, so you've Flintstoned your product, you have customers, go try to find one of your customers that knows how to code. And this has the benefit of they understand the problem that you're trying to solve very deeply, because they thought enough to buy a solution to that problem. They also have very strong opinions about how you're solving the problem and ways that you could be doing it differently. So this is the best case scenario. Not all of your customers are going to know how to code. Many businesses have no customers that know how to code, but it's always worth checking because when it happens, it's like magic. So the inverse to this, so the worst type of technical co-founder is this amazing programmer that you found in a meetup. So my general rule of thumb is you are not going to find your technical co-founder at an event that is for programmers. It's very minusculely possible, but it's very unlikely unless your product is for programmers. And at that point, the first rule applies. They're a customer. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see founders who are looking for their technical co-founder make is they go to events for programmers. They go to where programmers hang out, and they try to find a good co-founder among that big group of people. But it's much more effective to go where your co-founders are, where a good co-founder would hang out, and then try to find a programmer that's there. So that can be trade shows, conferences, that can be online forums where they might hang out. And the side benefit of that is a good technical co-founder is probably like where they hang out is probably also where your customers hang out. So you can look for both at the same time. So the other big warning that I want to put out is that working with somebody really inexperienced, like it's really easy to find like a student or somebody who's recently graduated who's interested in working on a startup. And they're in the best possible place to do an equity deal. So it's pretty easy to find somebody who's willing to do this. But it's like product management hard mode. So if you've ever mentored a junior employee before, you'll know that that's extremely difficult to do in and of itself. In like the best case scenario, it's still a hard thing to do. But in this case, you are mentoring a junior employee, but you don't know how to do the thing that you're mentoring them in. And not that it's not possible. I've definitely seen some students do amazing work on products. But if you look at stories where somebody makes something when they're a student, most often they're making their own product. They are founding the company themselves because it's a problem that they already understand. Having a student who doesn't have much work experience or life experience be able to understand your product, depending on what it is, can be extremely difficult. And then you also have to manage them and provide them the mentorship to grow as a programmer in addition to everything else. So not that you shouldn't look at this option, it just is maybe the hardest version of doing this. So take caution if you're going to. So if you aren't able to find a technical co-founder, which that is the bulk of technical founders, that's fine. And I think working with a contractor is great and totally viable. Bias warning here, that is what my company does, but so do a lot of other ones. But the important thing to understand about working with a technical contractor is that there are many, many, many business models that software contractors can follow, and only a very few of them work well for serving startups. So the key indicator here is that the contractor can align their business with the growth of your business. So if they build their sales funnel out of referrals and returning customers, that's a really great sign, because it means they have to do a really good job on executing the products that they execute in order to make money. So for example, at RokkinCat, I handle most of the sales, and I'm really hesitant to work with any founders who haven't Flintstone their product and shown me that they're able to run their product in the same way that an investor would. Because while I might be able to make, maybe $50,000 for building a product for somebody who hasn't done any prior work, hasn't done any research or Flintstoned anything, the likelihood that they succeed and need more of my time later is pretty low. So I can make the $50,000 and then that's game over. But if I work with somebody who has Flintstone their product, they have a couple of customers, they know exactly what they need, even if their project is only $5,000, the likelihood that they come back over and over and over again as their company grows is really high. And so there are contractors out there that work in that way and think of their customers in that way, but it's important to, it's easier to work with them if they align in that direction. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to succeed with basically any type of contractor. It's definitely possible, but I think it's really important to understand the business model that they're following and how it aligns with your business model. So this part could be a whole talk in and of itself, and I'm happy to take questions about all the different kinds of software contracting and how they interact with startup product building. But I don't want to get too deep into it unless you all are super, super interested. So once you have a team, there's kind of two rough strategies that you can follow for turning your big ball of jank that we created by Flintstoning into a nice product. So one is to replace it kind of little piece by little piece. And to do this, you try to identify the tool that's limiting you the most from making more money and only replace just that little bit. And you do that incrementally until you've replaced everything in total. And this has the benefit of a really tight feedback loop where you can see how your customers are reacting to the small changes that you're making. And ideally, each change that you make improves your ability to bring in revenue. So maybe the first change you make lets you add 5 more customers, and the next change you make lets you add 10 more customers. And the benefit of that is it makes it easier to pay for this out of revenue as opposed to needing to go raise money or take out a loan or something like that. The big downside is that it tends to be a little bit more time consuming and like energy intensive to manage it because there's a lot of different moving pieces. So if you've Flintstoned your way to this point, you're probably pretty overwhelmed by just trying to serve your customers. And so tacking on trying to manage something like this, which feels sometimes like a full-time job in and of itself, can be a little daunting. So there's some ways to deal with that, but it's definitely the more time-consuming version to manage. And then because each piece is developed and then needs to integrate with the whole working system, it tends to be a little bit more expensive to build things in this way. In my opinion, the end result is still better, and the incremental improvements in revenue that you get along the way tend to be worth more than the savings of the other option, but it does tend to cost more if you add up all the invoices. So the other option you have is to just replace it wholesale. And in this version, you sit down with whatever technical team you're going to use and explain what you need. You show them the big ball of jank that you made, and you say, please make this into one software. And that is pretty easy to wrap your head around as the technical team. And since it's all getting built out in one go, it tends to be, you get to the full feature set faster and cheaper than with a piecemeal approach. And it is easier to contract out because it's a larger chunk of money all at once. You don't have to be working together as tightly and well integrated, but it's much harder to get the product fully correct when you do it this way. The likelihood when you've explained the fullness of your product that the technical team has missed something or misinterpreted or forgotten something is pretty high. So that piece is a little risky. And then build outs like this sometimes take 3 to 6 months, and in startup time that's a very long time. So while it might be what you like, the most correct thing that you wanted when you asked for it, 6 months later the business might be so different from what you asked for at the beginning that now it's not as useful as it would have been when you asked for it. So there's pros and cons to each side of this, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can do hybrids of the two. But however you go about building it out, whatever strategy you take, the big thing to avoid is to add a bunch of new stuff when you're doing this first layer of development. It's really exciting to be able to write your product for the first time and get it out there. And many founders will try to tack on all their wish list features here because they've been waiting, a year or 2 years as they're working with customers to try to get this out. But those are all hypotheses that you haven't gotten a chance to test. So my advice here is to try to focus on just replacing what you have with a faster and better system, and that can act as a nice stable base to run more Flintstoning experiments on that has a lot more speed and time to feedback. So when you've done this, you can now kind of slide into where all the startup books tell you to go, which is you build a little bit, you talk to your customers about how that change worked, and then you delete out what's not working. And it can be really uncomfortable for founders to be okay with deleting out things that aren't working because you paid somebody to write that code, and so why would you want to get rid of it? But what isn't in your product is often just as important as what is in your product, and it's a lot harder to get right. And one of the things about software that if you don't build it a lot is not really intuitive either, is that the more of it you have, like the bigger your product is, the more expensive each subsequent change is, more time consuming, more expensive, and harder to do. So if you can take the time to delete out experiments that weren't working, it makes all of your future tests and hypotheses go faster and cheaper. So that's a little small distinction, but it ends up accumulating over time to be very valuable. So this is the spot where the technical, the fairy tale version that I talked about at the beginning, where you already know how to code, this is where that fairy tale truly starts. And so it feels a little unfair that other people get to start here. But in my experience, when people start at this phase here, which admittedly, this is where I normally start incorrectly because I'm lazy, but you don't have the full experience and benefit of the deep understanding that comes from having Flintstoned your product to this point. So if I'm an investor and I see two products that are exactly the same, but one of the founders Flintstoned their way to this point as opposed to just starting here, I'd put my money on the Flintstone product every time. So once you've gotten to this point, you're kind of off into the more mature code base. There's a ton of books that you can read here, and you just do this over and over again until you're a millionaire. So there we made it, straight to the moon. And so I'm going to leave a slide up here with some of my favorite places to get information on product management and team management for more mature products. So if you're feeling like you're already past what I talked about today, feel free to check these out. They're great resources kind of generally, but specifically around product management. So, and with that, I'll open it up to questions. Happy to talk about anything we talked about today or just riff on ideas for how to Flintstone everybody's products.
That is awesome. Thank you so much.